I was halfway through signing the papers that would destroy her dream when she looked at me with eyes so full of desperation that I couldn't breathe. Not angry, not pleading, just exhausted, like someone who had spent years fighting every battle alone and had finally run out of strength. And somehow, in that single moment, I knew I would never forget her. The first time I met Emily Carter, I was carrying a folder labeled property closure authorization. She was carrying a box of paintbrushes. We crossed paths in the hallway of an old brick building in downtown Cincinnati. I worked for a real estate investment company. Our job was simple: purchase struggling properties, renovate them, and lease them to larger businesses. The building Emily rented space in had recently been acquired by my company. Her art studio was one of the last remaining tenants. My assignment was straightforward: review the leases, issue the closure notices, help clear the building, move on. I had done it dozens of times before. Businesses closed, people adapted. That was life. Or at least that's what I told myself. Emily stopped when she saw my company logo. Her smile faded immediately. "You're from Sterling Development?" I nodded. "I'm Daniel." She looked down. Oh, that single word carried more disappointment than 100 angry speeches. She adjusted the box in her arms. "I guess you're here about the studio." I hesitated. "Yeah?" She forced a smile. "Then welcome." I expected hostility. Instead, she opened the door and invited me inside. The studio wasn't what I expected. It wasn't some trendy art space filled with wealthy clients. It was alive. Children's paintings covered one wall. Community projects filled another. Colorful murals decorated nearly every surface. A group of teenagers sat around a table working on sketches. An elderly woman painted quietly near the window. Everyone looked happy, safe, like they belonged. Emily noticed me looking around. "We teach classes." "Looks busy." "It is." She smiled proudly. "We serve almost 200 people every month." I glanced through my paperwork. The numbers didn't match what I was seeing. The studio barely made enough money to survive. "How do you stay open?" Her expression softened. "We don't always." I looked up. "What does that mean?" She laughed quietly. "It means some months I pay the electric bill before I pay myself." Something about her honesty caught me off guard. Most people try to impress. Emily simply told the truth. For the next hour, she showed me around. She introduced every student by name. She knew their stories, their struggles, their dreams. One teenager named Marcus barely spoke. After he walked away, Emily explained, "He lost his mother last year." I nodded. "He doesn't talk much anymore, but he comes here every week." She smiled. "He paints." Later she pointed toward a young girl working on a canvas. "That's Ava." "What about her?" "Her family lives in a shelter." I swallowed. Emily continued. "She says this is her favorite place in the world." Suddenly the closure notice in my folder felt heavier, much heavier. When I left that afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about the studio, or Emily, or the people who depended on that place. 3 days later, I returned to deliver the official notice. Emily was alone. The classes had ended. Sunlight streamed through the windows. She looked tired, very tired. When she saw the envelope in my hand, she already knew. I handed it to her. She didn't open it immediately. She simply stared at it. Then she smiled. Not because she was happy, because she didn't want me to feel bad. That somehow made everything worse. "How long?" she asked. 90 days. She nodded slowly. "Okay." That was all. No yelling, no accusations, no tears. Just okay. I finally asked the question that had been bothering me. "Why aren't you angry?" Emily looked toward the paintings covering the walls. "Because being angry won't save this place." Then she looked at me. And that's when it happened. That look, the look I would remember forever. Not because she expected me to help, not because she wanted pity, but because she was carrying the weight of hundreds of broken hearts and didn't know how to protect them anymore. "You know what hurts most?" she said softly. I shook my head. "The kids." My chest tightened. "They've already lost so much." Her voice cracked for the first time. "This studio gives them something to believe in." Silence filled the room. Then she whispered, I don't know how to tell them it's over. I drove home that night unable to sleep. I kept seeing Marcus, Ava, the elderly woman by the window, Emily. For years I had treated closures like paperwork, but now they had faces, stories, names. The next morning, I made a decision. I started asking questions. The building was scheduled for redevelopment, but construction wasn't beginning for nearly a year. The studio didn't actually need to leave immediately. Someone had simply decided it wasn't profitable enough. That realization bothered me a lot. Over the following weeks, I visited the studio regularly. Officially, I was conducting tenant assessments. Unofficially, I was trying to understand what made the place so special. Every visit revealed something new. Emily offered free classes for veterans. She organized art programs for struggling families. She spent her own money buying supplies. Whenever donations came in, she used them for students first, never herself. One evening I found her cleaning paint trays after everyone had left. "You stay late every night?" She laughed. "Pretty much." "Why?" She looked surprised by the question. "Because people need this place." "No," I said. "Why do you?" For a moment she was silent. Then she answered, "When I was 16, a community center saved my life." I listened. "My father died." Her eyes drifted toward the floor. "My mother worked 3 jobs." She smiled sadly. "I was angry at the world." Then she pointed around the room. "Art gave me somewhere to put that pain." Suddenly everything made sense. This wasn't a business. It was gratitude transformed into service. Emily wasn't running a studio. She was repaying a debt to kindness. And she had spent years doing it. A month later, disaster struck. The roof began leaking after a severe storm. Water damaged supplies. Several classrooms flooded. Insurance wouldn't cover enough. The repair estimate was enormous. I arrived the following morning to find Emily sitting alone. The studio was dark. She looked defeated. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw tears. "I can't do this anymore." My heart sank. She laughed bitterly. "I fought for years." She wiped her eyes. "But I think this is the end." Something inside me refused to accept that. That evening I made dozens of phone calls. I contacted local businesses, former students, community organizations, anyone willing to listen. At first, nothing happened. Then one person donated, then another, then 10 more. Within days, something incredible started spreading across the city. Former students shared stories online. Parents posted photos. Teachers spoke about lives Emily had changed. A local newspaper picked up the story. Donations poured in. Volunteers arrived. Painters, electricians, contractors, people Emily had helped years earlier came back to help her. One former student drove 6 hours just to volunteer. When I asked why, he smiled. "Because she never gave up on me." The movement grew larger than anyone expected. And Emily had no idea I started it. She thought the community had simply come together. Honestly, that was better, because it was true. I had only lit a match. The city became the fire. 3 weeks later, the studio reopened. Better than before. The grand reopening filled the entire block. Families stood in line. Students laughed. Music played. Color seemed to exist everywhere. Emily stood near the entrance greeting everyone. When she finally saw me, she walked over. "You knew about this?" I tried to play innocent. She laughed. "You're a terrible liar." I smiled. Maybe I was. For a moment we simply stood there watching the crowd. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You gave me hope." I shook my head. "Number." I pointed toward the families. Them. Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe. Months passed. The redevelopment company eventually reconsidered its plans. After enough public support and community pressure, they agreed to preserve the studio permanently. Not because it generated profit, because it generated something more valuable: connection, belonging, humanity. The day the agreement became official, The entire studio celebrated. Marcus smiled for the first time in months. Ava sold her first painting. The elderly woman near the window hugged everyone she could find. And Emily cried openly, happy tears. The kind people earn. Later that evening, after everyone left, she and I sat quietly in the studio. The same studio I had once been hired to shut down. The same studio that had changed me. Sunlight faded through the windows. The room felt peaceful. Emily looked around at the paintings. Funny. What? If you had done your job, none of this would still exist. I nodded. She wasn't wrong. Then she turned toward me. And if you hadn't cared, neither would I. For a second neither of us spoke. Finally I smiled. You were never anyone's last chance, Emily. She looked confused. What do you mean? I gestured toward the walls. The artwork, the photographs, the memories, the lives she touched. All these years, you've been giving people second chances. Her eyes filled again. You just forgot that someday people would give one back. The silence that followed felt warm, comfortable. The kind that exists between people who understand each other without words. Outside, the city lights flickered to life. Inside, a dream continued breathing. Not because one person saved it, but because kindness has a way of multiplying. One act inspires another. One helping hand becomes hundreds. One heart changes a community. I had arrived carrying papers meant to end a story. Instead, I became part of one. And standing there beside Emily, surrounded by proof that compassion still matters, I realized something simple but powerful. The strongest buildings aren't made of brick or steel. They're built from people who refuse to let each other fall. And when enough hearts come together, even a place destined to disappear can become something permanent. Not just a studio, a home, a hope, a reminder that sometimes the person sent to close the door becomes the one who helps keep it open.